1. The Empire that ruled the world, long before Rome or Alexander, the Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great around 550 BCE, was the most powerful state on earth. It stretched from the Mediterranean to India, ruled over more than 50 million people, and built roads, laws, and systems that held together dozens of cultures. The Achaemenid Persians were not just conquerors, they were administrators. They allowed subject peoples to keep their religions, their languages, and even their kings, as long as they paid tribute and remained loyal. This policy of tolerance made Persia an empire of diversity, not tyranny. But it also meant that unity was fragile, dependent on the strength and wisdom of the king at its center. For 2 centuries, the Persian kings, from Cyrus to Darius to Xerxes, maintained this delicate balance, until eventually it began to crumble. 2. Seeds of weakness. By the 4th century BCE, Persia's golden age was fading. Several key weaknesses emerged. Overexpansion. The empire had grown too vast to manage effectively. Communication across thousands of miles took months, and local satraps, governors, ruled their provinces almost like independent kings. Corruption. Many satraps became wealthy and arrogant. Bribes, local revolts, and palace intrigues became common. Declining military edge. Persian armies were once disciplined and massive, but by the late Achaemenid period, they relied heavily on mercenaries, Greek soldiers who often fought only for gold. Economic strain. Decades of wars, especially against the Greeks, drained the treasury. Taxation grew heavier, and rebellions simmered across the empire. Cultural complacency. Persia's power had made it comfortable. Innovation slowed. The empire that once conquered Babylon and Egypt now struggled to defend its borders. 3. The ghost of defeat, the Greco-Persian Wars. Centuries before Alexander, Persia had already tasted humiliation. In the early 5th century BCE, the Persian kings Darius I and Xerxes I attempted to conquer Greece. They burned Athens, yes, but they also suffered crushing defeats at Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea. These defeats didn't destroy the empire, but they damaged its image of invincibility. From that point onward, the Greeks, once small city-states, began to see Persia not as a godlike power, but as a mortal enemy that could be beaten. This psychological shift would prove fatal centuries later. 4. The last great kings. After Xerxes, Persia entered an age of decline marked by palace conspiracies and weak rulers. Kings like Artaxerxes I, Darius II, and Artaxerxes II spent much of their reigns suppressing revolts or fighting internal wars. Assassination became common. Even royal family members murdered one another for the throne. By the time Darius III came to power around 336 BCE, the once great Persian Empire was an exhausted giant, rich in land but poor in loyalty. Darius III inherited not an empire of unity, but of resentment. 5. Enter Alexander, the storm from the west. In 334 BCE, a 22-year-old Macedonian king named Alexander crossed the Hellespont with 40,000 men. To Persia, this was a minor disturbance, one of many Greek raids. But Alexander was no ordinary invader. He saw himself as the avenger of Greece, destined to destroy the Persian Empire that had once burned Athens. He also had inherited a powerful, disciplined army and the tactical genius of his father, Philip II. The Persians underestimated him, fatally. 6. The fall of Darius III. Darius III's downfall was not inevitable, but it was swift. At Granicus, 334 BCE, his satraps failed to stop Alexander's army. At Issus, 333 BCE, Darius himself fled the battlefield, leaving his family behind, a devastating humiliation. And at Gaugamela, 331 BCE, one of the most decisive battles in ancient history, the Persian army was annihilated despite outnumbering Alexander's forces 3-1. Darius fled again, this time not as a king, but as a fugitive. He was later betrayed and killed by his own satrap, Bessus, ending the Achaemenid royal line. When Alexander marched into Persepolis, the Persian capital, he symbolically burned the royal palace, the house of kings that had once ruled the known world. It was the end of an empire and the beginning of another. 7. Why Persia fell. Historians have long debated whether Alexander conquered Persia, or if Persia had already defeated itself. The truth lies somewhere in between. Internal decay. By the 4th century BCE, the Persian administration had grown bloated and corrupt. The satraps acted like mini-kings, often defying royal commands. Lack of unity. The empire was ethnically and culturally diverse, a strength under wise rulers, but a weakness under weak ones. When Alexander invaded, many provinces refused to fight for Darius. Military stagnation. Persian forces still relied on cavalry and mass infantry formations, while Alexander's Macedonian phalanx and combined arms tactics were revolutionary. Persian generals were brave, but outmatched. Leadership crisis. Darius III was not a coward, but he was indecisive. He lacked the charisma, strategy, and vision of his great ancestor Cyrus. In contrast, Alexander was an unstoppable force of will. Cultural hubris. Persia had grown complacent after 2 centuries of dominance. Many elites underestimated the Macedonians until it was too late. 8. The aftermath. A new Persian identity. When Alexander took control of the Persian Empire, he didn't destroy it entirely. He absorbed it. He adopted Persian dress, married a Persian princess, and kept many Persian administrators in power. In doing so, Alexander recognized what his enemies had built, a system so advanced that even a conqueror could not replace it. After his death, the Persian heartlands passed into the hands of his successors, the Seleucid Empire, and later, the Parthians. Each new dynasty claimed to inherit the legacy of the Achaemenids, blending Greek and Persian traditions. Persia, as a political entity, fell, but Persian culture survived, reshaping itself again and again through Parthian, Sasanian, and Islamic ages. Even in defeat, Persia remained one of the most resilient civilizations in human history. 9. The legacy of the fall. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire was one of history's great turning points. It marked the end of the ancient Near Eastern empires that began with Assyria and Babylon, the rise of Greek cultural dominance, the Hellenistic Age, the fusion of East and West that would define world history for centuries. But it also left a lasting myth, the idea that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to time, corruption, and overreach. Cyrus had once united the known world under the banner of tolerance and law. 2 centuries later, that vision was lost to arrogance, complacency, and the chaos of succession. Persia's fall was not the failure of a people, it was the failure of leadership to evolve. 10. The eternal echo. Today, when historians speak of the fall of the Persian Empire, they are not just describing a military defeat, they are describing the end of an era. The Achaemenids built the world's first true global empire, a system of administration, tolerance, and infrastructure that laid the groundwork for Rome, Byzantium, and even modern states. Alexander conquered Persia's territory, yes, but not its spirit. That spirit survived, adapted, and endured. It would rise again under new names, new dynasties, and new religions. The Persian Empire fell, but Persia never died. If you found this story fascinating, like, share, and subscribe to Timeless Questions channel, where we explore the civilizations, ideas, and mysteries that shaped humanity.